Hi, I'm Gautham Sastri. I'm the CEO of iSentium. I've been in the intelligence business for about 30 years. Began my career writing algorithms to find Russian submarines. This was when Reagan was trying to bankrupt the Soviets, which he did successfully. So finding signals in an ocean of noise is something that we're quite familiar with. Our Chief Technology Officer is a Fellow of the Royal Society, postdoc from MIT. She's written 18 books on linguistics. This is my third startup. The last one built the first post-9/11 surveillance system to monitor the internet and launch drone strikes. So a lot of text analysis, a lot of bandwidth. So I got involved with iSentium when I saw the emergence of social media, and I said, hey, this is civilian stuff. I don't have to be the government. I can just go subscribe to the feeds and apply the same principles to figure out what people's intentions are and generate actionable intelligence out of that. So that's a quick summary. We've been around since 2008. We've launched an index with JPM that's co-branded. We have a strategic relationship with Twitter, and NASDAQ is one of our distributors. We just launched 16 sentiment-based indexes with them that cover about $100 billion of AUM. So we're very institution grade, and we've been subscribing to stock twits and Twitter since about 2010. We process about 5,000 messages per second. So sifting through that to come up with signals that are obvious is something that I'll show you as we progress along. Do I just continue, or no, it's...
You could continue.
Okay. So why do you need to look at social media? Well, we produce more data every second than the New York Stock Exchange produces in tick data every day. So what's traditionally used for technical analysis is like Pluto in volume, and we're like Jupiter, and the stuff that nobody's looked at yet is like the sun. So in fact, people will be shocked to know that there's 50 trillion characters of information being transmitted on the internet every day, and there's 3 billion more people getting onto mobile devices over the next couple of years. So there's no end to this. And we're making trading decisions based on 0.0001% of what's available. So people think the trading pit is dead. Well, it's not dead, it's just moved on to the internet. And instead of having a few hundred people yelling at each other, you have a few million people communicating at light speed. So, you can't really make much sense of this Stanford visualization until you see what it did in terms of predicting the crash. Green is positive sentiment, and red is negative sentiment. And you can see that crowd sentiment went extremely negative while the S&P 500 was still climbing. And this chart was created on Monday, so if you extrapolate, the dip was actually much, much larger. So we make things that obvious, and we produce about 1,500 signals like this, minutely, hourly, daily, and distribute them through NASDAQ. So that's the extent of my presentation.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you a 3-minute story, and then we're going to go into the panel. You ready for a story? Okay, here we go. August 24th, 2015. I had just been CEO of Investopedia for about 6 months. This year is now my 3-year anniversary this month. The market, prior to it opening up, there was a flash crash, and it was down 1,000 points prior to opening up. Sound a little familiar to this past week, right? Suddenly, the head of marketing for Investopedia runs into my office. My head's in my hand. I'm totally scared about what's going to happen, just like we are a little bit this week. And he says, David, you're not going to believe it. Our short selling tutorial is flying through the roof right now. And I'm like, that's so cool. Like right at the same moment where 30 million people a month come to our site and they're looking at, and we're seeing like this massive number of people that are looking at short selling. It's kind of interesting, but it's not that interesting. Then we decided to create something called the Investopedia Anxiety Index. Because who doesn't want their brand associated with anxiety, right? So we put things up there like looking at how many people are looking at terms like inflation and deflation and bankruptcy and recession and volatility. And we said, if millions, not thousands, if millions of people are looking up bankruptcy, something bad is happening in the market, okay? So then we said, there's something there. So there's something there. So then what we did is we said, let's plot it. And we plotted it, and we saw that there are certain spikes around different times, Lehman Brothers collapse, Greek bailout, etc. And we said, that's interesting, but it's not that interesting. If you're a lagging metric, ain't that interesting. What is interesting? If you're what? Exactly, if you're a leading metric, if you're able to like actually potentially predict things. So then we plotted against the VIX, and you can see all the spikes at different times, and then comes the money slide, which is this one right here, which is essentially every single time that the Investopedia Anxiety Index, what people read on Investopedia peaks, within 2 or 3 weeks, sometimes within 1 or 3 weeks, the VIX actually has a peak. If you look at all 3 of the peaks that are there, the anxiety index increased prior to the peak. So of course the question that you're asking is, what happened this past week, right? Is that true or not true? Is it true or not true? So right now, by the way, our market anxiety index is at a 130 to tell you how high it is. And this is this last week, OMG. The blue is the Investopedia Anxiety Index for a week and a half prior to the big 115% increase of the VIX on Monday. The anxiety index had steadily been increasing. Boom, 115% increase in the VIX on Monday, where it kind of caught up with each other. Kind of cool, right? So that's the story. So we're going to be talking about and learning from some great people around sentiment. If anyone wants a copy of this, they could just send an email to communications@investopedia.com, and we'll send you a copy of the entire deck so you learn everything. Okay, guys, here we go. Love to hear first to tell me about the unique data that each of you are using to determine market sentiment. And I don't want the standard stuff. I want the unique data, and we're running a little bit behind, so keep your answers short and tight. What do you got to say?
Well, I think for
Loud and proud.
For StockTwits, it's sort of the most unique data because we're the primary source. So it's traders like yourself who are just hopping on the stream and saying, here's how I feel, here's what I'm doing every day. So it's a really unique perspective that we're able to give to traders and investors.
One of the unique sets in our, for our data is basically we have the largest coverage when it comes to public news and blogs. So we're able to track about 1 billion websites. So we can give everyone that initial overview of what everyone else is thinking itself.
In our case, it's not just about the company, but its entire ecosystem. So we do about 60 billion calculations every second to figure out what's happening with the supply chain of Apple. So, for example, they're dumping Qualcomm and going with Intel. They had the security flaw and so on and so forth, the battery scandal. So we're constantly looking at the entire ecosystem rather than just the ticker-centric chatter.
Okay, so this is really interesting, but for investors in the audience here, how can they really leverage sentiment and social sentiment, et cetera? It's nice to pay tens of thousands of dollars maybe to subscribe to things, but maybe they don't want to do that. Maybe they do, but what can they actually do to leverage social sentiment? Love to hear that from each of you so that they can take some practical things back with them.
Yeah, so I think social sentiment is probably a little bit scary for a lot of people who haven't heard it before. StockTwits does a really good job, as you saw by our slides, of putting out a front web product that is always there for you. So whatever you're investing in, if you hop on our streams for free, you can go see the social sentiment of other traders. For example, if you're trading Apple, we have 200,000 people watching, trading, and talking about Apple on our streams. So you can see what their sentiment is, really easy, start to just look at it and start to compare it to your trading and how it might fit in there.
I mean, for like a trader itself, we're able to identify early news and send that as an alert to you. So from tracking about 1 billion websites, we can look at these niche news and niche blogs, and the people that wrote those articles validate if what they're saying is actually accurate, and then automatically send a news alert if you're using a certain trading platform, brokerage platform, messaging alert. So we can just push that alert directly for you. So you can look at that news and then execute on the trade itself.
Yeah. In my view, if you do the same thing as what everybody else is doing, you're going to have the same results as everybody else.
Yep.
And the pundits tend to get it wrong. Apple launched a $1,000 phone and it's outselling the cheaper phone. But we could see the sentiment about the iPhone 10. Now, Samsung has accelerated the delivery of the Samsung Galaxy 10 by about 6 weeks. So an esoteric trade would be to look at how people see the iPhone 10 versus the Galaxy 10, and if the Samsung product is more popular, it's a leading indicator that Apple's market share is going to be poached upon. So, and this stuff takes a long time to build. We're talking about weeks of, sentiment. It starts off as a spark and then becomes a wildfire. So that would be one way to trade Apple, as an example.
Great example. Thank you. Okay, so news, blogs, social media, it's like instantaneous. It happens, it's on the news and Twitter before it actually even happens now, right? Somehow, I don't know how, but somehow it's on Twitter before it actually even happened. So if that's the case...
Or StockTwits.
What's that?
Or StockTwits.
Or StockTwits. So if that's the case, can investors really leverage news and blogs, and somehow before they get onto traditional media outlets, or just don't even bother and just give up? Don't even bother, or actually there's a way to potentially bother in your opinions? And let's do, just for fun, the reverse this time. Gautham, why don't you go first and bring it that way?
Well, the reason why you need AI is because there's so much of it that you can't read it yourself. So you can't read 4,000 tweets yourself. And what we do is essentially turn it into, call it sentiment ticks. So instead of price, you're looking at sentiment. The other thing that we've done to generate news before there's even news is POTUS, as in President of the United States, .live is a demonstration site that we built. So you can see all his tweets on a map of the US, and you can see the most retweeted on the left. And you can also click on one of the circles.
Does that have a high volatility?
Yeah, I mean, his mood fluctuates quite a bit, and the reaction is generally the exact opposite of what he thinks.
Very interesting.
Yeah, so, but it's also searchable. You can say, what's that guy talking about, and click on it, and it'll show you the tweet. So you literally see the headlines because that's what's the most retweeted, and therefore the most topical. So it's a new area, but we're trying to figure out how to package it so people can understand what it means. That's the next layer of effort that we're putting in.
Well, if you could figure out that, then you're well beyond many other people.
So, I mean, I agree with Gautam's point. There's just so many data that's out there online. It's just impossible for anyone to actually read all that news by themselves. So that's why you actually need artificial intelligence, natural language processing algos to actually scan these articles automatically, understand them, and then interpret them for you. So you don't have to read 1 billion articles or 1 million articles by yourself. So that's one the competitive advantage that technologies like ours have, it's able to identify those niche blogs, those niche news sites that could give you early warning before it actually spread to these traditional sites like Bloomberg and Reuters, where as soon as there's a news piece on Bloomberg, the entire world knows. Every single trader in the market knows. But if there is a critical news on a small blog site that has like 100 followers, it's going to take a while before it catch on and a lot of people actually seen it. So that's where you can actually take that advantage and actually act on that information itself.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with that. I think, to a certain extent, listen, we do 200,000 messages a day. You can't go through that, right? So you need these products. But if you're an individual trader, like I am myself, you might be in a certain trade, right? And all of a sudden you see price spikes and you're like, what is going on? You go to your news outlets, you can't find anything. But the amazing thing about our streams, and is the first place I go when I see price that I don't understand, is there's so many people with so much information that it's going to get out there and you're going to be able to digest it and get something out of it. And then over time, you start to accumulate knowledge of who really understands the markets, and you can follow them. And when they release something, you know for sure or with a high certainty that this is something I should be paying attention to. So I think there's a balance between the two that's really important.
Awesome. Okay, back to Michael. Are you seeing certain trends happening in investor sentiment? Are there other uses that we haven't really talked about in finance regarding investing sentiment? Love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, so I think investor sentiment is in many ways becoming sort of the new market technicals. And again, that might shock a lot of people, but it is because there's so much of it, and products like you guys put out help us with that. So I think you can see new trends just in terms of the overall sentiment of sectors. It's not just, what's the sentiment of Apple or of Bitcoin? It's what are sentiment in sectors. It might be retail, and you can start to digest that and really ride those trends and get on top of them because you understand the overall market sentiment is positive or negative.
Yeah, I mean, there's tons of different use cases in terms of sentiment itself. So like a lot of quantitative hedge funds are taking advantage of sentiment now. Another totally different use cases like bankruptcy that you mentioned, David. So there's a lot of commercial banks, the credit card division, they want to track, so they lend credit to a lot of companies, and they want to know that, okay, are these companies actually able to pay back their credit? So they're going to track every single news on these companies. If there's some sort of negative news on these companies, they're going to want to know immediately, and then they're going to pick up the phone, call the company, and they're going to be like, hey, what's happening? So
should people at those companies not be looking up the word bankruptcy on Investopedia? Big Brother will know?
That can maybe trigger some stuff. But
Crowd sentiment is the canary in the coal mine. People talk about the wisdom of the crowd. The wisdom of the wise has produced zero returns over the past 10 years. So it is the wisdom of the crowd, and the chart that I'd put up clearly demonstrates that the crowd was spooked and the canary flew away about 10 days before the correction happened. And if you go to iSentium.com, we've got videos, we've got charts. I even set the Wells Fargo crisis to Carmina Burana just to produce a movie about, the whole scandal where they ripped off their clients. So if nobody got upset, Wells Fargo's price wouldn't have tanked. But people are outraged. They got their refunds, and the price came back strong because who's going to move their bank account? All your payments, everything. It's going to take you weeks before you normalize your life. So it was a 33% cycle. If you shorted, waited 6 weeks, and then bought. And you could see it go red and then go back green, which was totally unexpected. So the crowd is irrational, but it drives the market.
Mm-hmm. I love the comment on wisdom of the crowds. I didn't plan to do this, but I will share again a super fast story, 30 seconds, on my favorite wisdom of the crowds comment, which is the big glass jars with jelly beans that you'll see at fairs. Everyone know those things, right? Guess how many jelly beans there are? So they actually did a study, and they looked at how many people, what the guesses of how many jelly beans there were. And some people said 30, some people said 1,000, and they did this whole study around how many jelly beans people asked. And when they did the average of the number of jelly beans that people guessed were in the jar, the average consistently, time after time after time, ended up coming out within like 5% of the actual final number. So it's just a very fascinating study around the wisdom of the crowds and figure that out. Any thoughts, Michael? So thank you for bringing that up. Michael or Kumesh on wisdom of the crowds?
Well, I just think that's interesting because that's something that I said to when you start getting into social sentiment is that sentiment tends to revert to the mean.
Right.
So it's exactly the same thing there. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely see these types of trends once you aggregate all the sentiment together for a specific company, and that could show a good predictive long-term trend for the company, whether the sentiment is trending upwards or downwards. It could signify if the company is going to be in trouble or if the company is going to prosper in the long term itself.
Awesome. Okay. Any crazy like alternative data that they would be, that everyone here would just be like, I'm shocked that that's being used. That is being used at all, that you know in the either with yourselves or just in the industry as a whole that you know someone else happens to be doing? Anyone have any thoughts on that or no?
So I know there's quite a few different alternative data that's out there. So like the ones that's pretty much brand new, I think, is people are actually scraping the job posting of different companies.
Oh.
And so if a lot of companies are posting more jobs, then that shows that the company is growing. If they're removing jobs, which hasn't been filled yet, it shows that the company is actually in trouble.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. That's,
so
yeah.
I'm just going to start posting a ton of jobs for
exactly.
right now, and then woo! That makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a very cool one. Any others you guys have heard about?
I mean, just transactional data too. So now it's, everybody waits for earnings to come out to hear how a company's doing. So people want to get ahead of that. So now they're doing things like, who's purchasing what and get out when it actually happens from the consumer and try to get that information. So it's just always about getting a step ahead. And these data sets are just, a piece of the puzzle ultimately.
Yeah, another one I want to add is satellite imagery. So people actually launch satellite up in the air and they're able to count the parking lots of different retail stores. And the parking lot is filled with cars. It signifies that, okay, this company might be getting a lot of revenues, but if the parking lot hasn't been so good in the past few weeks or so, it could show like a decrease in sales. There's a lot of flaws with that.
And Uber and Lyft might be changing some things around that potentially.
Yeah.
Okay, last question from me, and then we'll take one question for the audience, and that's it. Thank you, 5-minute warning. Question from me is artificial intelligence. Gautham talked a little bit about it, but it's just so big and happening. If you have thoughts to share on artificial intelligence around investor sentiment, please share. Gautham, why don't we start with you, and share if there's something to share, and don't if there's not.
Yeah, well, the thing that people don't realize about artificial intelligence is there's so much data that you need to pump into it that just the cost of handling all that data can bankrupt a company. So, it takes a lot of resilience from a funding perspective to build out systems that can give you this high, it's like 5K HD versus your old black and white TV set. It takes a lot of stuff in the background to make artificial intelligence useful and to make what it's saying obvious. All our mouse pads say, iSentium, we make things obvious. So that's the really tough challenge with all these systems.
So do you guys want to fight it out, or could we just ask the crowd one last question? Is that okay? One question. Oh no, we have 7 questions. But what's that? Okay, how do we choose? I'm going to pick her. Okay, you're standing. Your arm is going to come out. What's your question?
She was jumping to hide.
Jumping.
Thank you.
Woo.
It just seems back a couple of years ago, and I imagine other people are going to relate to this, that a couple of years ago you were able to go on MarketWatch or Yahoo or anywhere and get news on a particular stock. Say you see it, pre-markets going down. You look all over. You can't find one reason for that. Now, there is a definite reason that that's happening. And years ago, you could, not that long ago, maybe a couple of years, before, now I go on Twitter, and I put the symbol in, and sometimes things come up, and but most of the time now, they're just selling their websites to, to say, go on here, so you go.
Damn capitalists.
I agree with, but, it's just ridiculous that you can't get news. Now hearing you, this panel, I realize that you are the ones who are taking all the news. I don't know, so maybe Yahoo is forfeiting the news over to you. Why don't they, the major websites, have the information, even if I'm trading with Scottrade or TD Ameritrade or whatever, they don't have the news either. So there's a reason why stock, or when earnings are coming close, or you want to hear what the sentiment is. Now I would, definitely go to one of your websites, or all of them. So.
Okay, so thank you. I can see why you're jumping up and down. The only thing, my response to that, and then I'll let someone else respond too, is simply news is commoditized. So most brokerages tend to be investing less in the news side because there are so many other places to get them. And I think what you said is right. Comment by someone here.
I'll just touch on the point about you putting a ticker symbol into Twitter and you're getting all these people sell their products. So one thing about StockTwits is we're a moderated community. We're the only ones that do that. So if you go to the Apple stream and somebody's trying to sell a product versus share content, we pull that down because we don't want that to corrupt the stream. We want to keep it free for you to get actionable ideas. And I think that's where Twitter falls really short and why we've been so successful and our growth has been so good. So it might be something to try to.
I like it. Okay, so we're wrapped right now. The four of us are going to probably go into the corner over there. So if for some reason anyone has a question or wants to get a business card or whatever, feel free to meet us actually right outside those doors, probably in the corner if interested. And the only last thing I would say, because I didn't mention it, is we have something called Investopedia Academy. If anyone wants 50% off of a course, then you just have to send an email to communications@investopedia.com. All these investing courses and crypto courses and all this other stuff. So if you want a discount, just send it to there and we'll hook you up. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you to our panel and to David Siegel. So this will conclude our programming this morning. The exhibit hall is open. And of course, if you guys haven't had your temporary cherry tattoo from the Tasty Trade booth, by all means, please go by there. Thank you so much.
Southern wind sings again and not a lullaby. Baby powder beach under my feet has got me rolling, and the breeze through crackling leaves like a daytime campfire burn. And the ship is off to sea, and the wicked is a churn. As the southern wind sings again a night of lullaby. You could jump right in, let the music pull you in. You could jump right in, or lose yourself again. As the southern wind sings again a night of lullaby. Place the locals go and no one knows where to find it. And the river starts to flow inside the clouds of misty mountain. The water from this stone below becomes a blue-green fountain.